Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Brenner. I'm the head of creative at a small nonprofit organization called Data for Change. We're a global nonprofit, or this one. Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? No. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. So my name's Michael Brenner. I'm the head of creative at Data for Change. We're a global small nonprofit, remote, that works with social society organizations around the world to create data-driven or data-inspired advocacy campaigns. Today, I'm going to talk to you about 4 projects, but before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about us as an organization. So we defend human rights with data, and we equip communities and organizations to collect and communicate data in new, innovative, accessible, and responsible ways. And hopefully you'll see those threads come through in the projects here today. We started off in 2014 when we noticed a lot of organizations were collecting incredible data sets, except they were locked away in PDFs or they were locked away on websites. And they had incredible value to the world, especially for the organization's advocacy goals and their missions. It's just no one had access to it, right? So we're going to talk a lot about that today, as well as access. And then the other thing that we're trying to do as well is unlock the power of data by not talking necessarily about data literacy, but changing the conversation in and around these kind of like 3 core principles. Data curiosity, being data critical, and data confident. And no one of these are independent, but as people who work with data, ideally you would have all 3 of these. And if you think about it as like a soundboard, you would have them dialed up at different times in the data pipeline sequence. So whether it's, theorizing or understanding what data you do want to collect versus when you're writing the survey versus when you're analyzing it versus when you're about to communicate it, then giving that information and knowledge form, and then finally publishing it and putting it out there into the world. So we talk a lot about data curiosity, data criticalness, and data confidence. And ideally, or not ideally, we do have 3 primary streams of work as an organization. And those revolve in and around supporting organizations to collect new and original data sets or find open source data sets. A lot of the times, organizations that we're working with are generally underfunded, underrepresented, and often not included in official data sets for obvious reasons. Either governments or other strong actors are generally working against them. So we help them to collect their data so that they're in power of their own data. They decide who has access to it, and the data stays within the community itself. And then the other stream of work is in and around coaching. And so after we've collected data, we'll work with people from our organization, from our network, to then train on data skills. Data skills meaning anything from, again, collecting data, but then understanding what it means to actually create a strategic advocacy campaign. And also, where people are, how we're going to communicate with them, and then figuring out the best way to do that, but then also really drilling down into the data and finding those data stories and then diving deeper into those data stories and putting those at the forefront of all of the projects and outputs that we do. And then lastly, communicating data. In all of the projects that we're going to look at today, you probably won't see any type of classic data visualization, but what you're going to see are entry points into those data visualizations that are there to support stories, right? So story first, based on the data, it's either inspired, that's why we say data inspired or data driven, and then comes the hard facts as well. So because a lot of times, either stakeholders or communities that we're working with, that a data visualization isn't their preferred mode of communication. So as we heard in Raul's talk earlier, how can we inspire people to engage with the data so that they can then, interact with it, take something away from it, and then act upon it. So we'll kind of see that in the full cycle in the projects that we'll look at. And to do all these projects, none of us has any one set of skills that can make those projects happen. So the power of diversity for us is extremely important. And so here we have what a classic Data for Change creative team looks like. We have the CSO representatives who are from Yemen. We have a data wrangler who was a quantum physicist who came to our workshop. This is a photo from one of our workshops in Beirut. And he's like, I learned English 2.5 weeks before I came to this workshop so I could communicate with people. We're like, yes. We have a web developer from the States. We have a data journalist from the UK. Our team leader is from Lebanon, and our designer is from Libya. So just to give you an idea of having all of these different diverse skill sets, but also lived experiences to be able to look at a data set from an organization, from a context that may not be familiar to them. The CSOs become those stewards for the content, but also the context in which the data exists. And then everyone else can bring their lived experiences to help shape something very, very innovative and creative, but then also to respectfully engage in challenging each other's ideas and assumptions about what people may want to take from the data or what the data project should be. We are very methodical about being hands-on and giving people information and briefing people. We have a very structured, let's say, workflow, but that workflow isn't a formula. It allows for exploration and it allows for divergence and convergence, so that it's never, okay, we need to hit this, and this. They're just basically milestones to keep us within a trajectory so that we don't go totally off course. And then, all of a sudden we're baking into our projects the Big Mac index. I mean, that may be, pertinent at some points, but not in all of the projects. And the other thing is that we always say hack the box. Chances are that you have all of the ingredients that you need right in front of you to solve the problem. So this idea of thinking outside of the box is going to make you more creative. Embracing constraints and limitations will actually make you way more creative than saying, okay, we're going to throw all of that aside, ignore it, because then you actually have to deal with real world constraints and try to figure out how you can incorporate them, but then also how you can get around them, so to say. So hopefully you'll see some of that too in our project. So now we're going to dive into the 4 projects, but just to give you a quick overview of what some of the Data for Change project universes looks like. We've got projects that deal specifically with disinformation in Syria, or women's activist rights in Somalia, or youth perception in Yemen. We've got some COVID gifts in here, which I'll talk about next. But then also we have some self-initiated projects you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, which is we took 65,000 rows of text data from the Universal Periodic Review, which is a human rights mechanism that allows states to basically check each other's human rights records, and distill that into a couple of tools that small organizations that are normally excluded from the Universal Periodic Review can then participate into it. So we basically took what would normally be a team of 20 people working on one specific data set, put it into a series of tools, published it for free, and then gave it to small organizations so that they could also then start to lobby governments for their more grassroots issues. So the first project that we're going to look at today is from the pandemic. And during then, the WHO released a bunch of public service announcements, and they had a call for creatives. But again, it was locked away on a website, and those messages were never going to potentially make it out because they were just storing everything there. So we took that data, we assembled 5 teams, 1 from Egypt, 1 from India, Jordan, Ethiopia, and Lebanon. I think that's all 5. And so we created our own portal, so to say, but within those 5 countries, we asked each team to do some quick ground research to figure out how they could adapt those messages, not only in local languages, but then also to fit the contextual events that they were seeing on the ground. So for example, in Egypt, the team it was right around Ramadan, so they had noticed that people actually were ignoring social distancing. So they created a series of GIFs and assets that dealt specifically with social distancing. India dipped into its very, very rich, robust Bollywood visual history, and then recreated all of those messages using, characters from their from Bollywood films. And then in Jordan, there was a insight that children were actually having a difficult time dealing with the pandemic and some of the, like, whether it be social distancing, whether it be washing your hands, hygiene. So that team created a comic that could then be read by parents to children. So then, again, localizing, quote unquote, the data and the messaging versus Kenya, which had a referendum on, I think it was on renting rights. And so their assets dealt in and around about protection of renters versus landlords. And then in Lebanon, there was a lot of disinformation floating around specifically about bats and other types of weird ways that COVID was spreading. So they created these assets that then combated these basically mythbusters. And then in Ethiopia, again, meeting, and I'll talk about this organization in a couple of other slides, but then this organization together, they deal primarily or work primarily with visually impaired or legally blind persons, or people with visibility and access needs. So they actually put all of they recorded in Amharic, and then they had a truck drive around their communities, neighborhoods with audible messages cycling through. But one of the big things that we noticed, especially with the digital assets, was that they were not moving anywhere. So we had a quick pivot and we're like, well, what's everyone doing? They're at home, right? So everyone's at home on their phones. Because this is sensitive data and it was issued, it's already public facing. What we did is we actually took all of the content that we had and dumped it on every possible GIF keyboard that we could. So if you actually take out your phones now, you can type in hashtag data for change on any GIF keyboard on any platform, and it will serve you our content. We then created a taxonomy of countries and then languages and then issues so that you could actually cycle through the content just by using hashtags on your keyboards. So at the time, this is all time. At the time, I think it was like around 49 million views. But I mean, for some reason, you can see these weird spikes and dips in the Giphy charts, but we don't have the data for Tenor, Giphy, or Imager. And again, this is the hashtag taxonomy that we had created. So it was just a quick, easy way to meet people where they were, home on their phone, and then also, that they could easily distribute content on whatever platform they wanted. So then we shifted our communications and pivoted after we had spent that time creating our own repository, which seems now absolutely absurd and ridiculous. Okay, so Hacky Data Lab and data murals. So the Hacky Data Lab, in collaboration with the Mathare Social Justice Center, also during COVID, wanted to know how their community's experience was during COVID. And so to better understand that, how could they collect data and how could they then give that data back to the community, pull insights from it, but that data all remain in the community itself. So they had ownership over it and access. So they got together and they started to ask community members, what they wanted to know from their own experiences, so that it's also a co-created survey, not just the output. And so, what issues were really important to them, and what insights they were after. So then they created the survey, the series of questions, and then during the design research, one of the things that came up was, and from our observations, that doing and sending information out into the community in murals is a general accepted form of communication. So then, it seemed like a logical, obvious next point to go and say, okay, well, let's do a data mural in terms of collecting some of the questions. So we can see here, participants, this particular participant, you're mapping your questions from line to line. And actually, this mural is still there today in Dandora in Nairobi, which is one of the poorest slums in Nairobi County. And then on top of that, they also set up some other walls where they had some, simple questions where then, you have this stenciled response to it so that they could see in real time and also very quickly who had helped during COVID-19. So, it also becomes not only just a data visualization, it becomes a conversation, but it also becomes a memorial and also a thank you to specific actors that had helped during COVID-19. And then also some singular stats. So again, the team from the Hacky Data Lab. Afterwards, they made a small video about the project and the process. And for them, once they understood that data didn't necessarily have to be delivered in a chart or it didn't have to be delivered in a PDF, it had much more meaning for them. And actually, the advocacy work that they were doing then increased tenfold, because while they understood the power and the importance of this particular project and how data could be delivered and seen in new ways, they also understood too, okay, but for certain audiences, we do need to have those kind of more traditional things left. Okay, so I've got to speed up. So equal victims. This was a project that was done in Uganda and this is Eric, and Eric is from Uganda, and he's a director of Lifeline. And basically, Lifeline empowers LGBTQ youth through health, rights advocacy, and data initiatives. But also in 2023, Uganda passed a terrifying anti-homosexual act that introduced the death penalty and criminalized the so-called promotion of homosexuality, which included sharing information, encouraging acceptance, offering support, hosting community gatherings. So this effectively outlaws the work that Eric and his organization Lifeline could do, and by collaboration. So also in 2023, Lifeline secured funding to collect data for intimate partner violence, IPV, and within Uganda's queer community. The problem was the World Health Organization and the Ugandan Bureau of Statistics collect IPV data for heterosexual relationships, but for the queer relationships, nothing. So this is a massive, dangerous void, because then larger organizations don't know how to respond and to create programming to help marginalized communities. Without this data, health providers can't plan support, lawmakers can't advocate, and society pretends queer IPV doesn't exist. So we started talking and bouncing ideas around, and during Lifeline's community sessions, they were holding conversations, but then they were holding art moments where people could draw about their experiences. And then they were able to, once they had something that they could hold in front of them and point to it, they were able to then open up and talk about their experiences without being re-traumatized. So using a piece of art to indicate, this is how I'm feeling, let me show you how I'm feeling. So then, boom, that all came together. And so we created a new methodology for collecting with, not from communities, and we called it Power Portraits, which is a participatory, reciprocal, and non-extractive process. So effectively, instead of asking people to review their traumas in words or to squeeze their stories into predefined drop-down categories, participants co-created a personal portrait using symbols and icons representing different aspects of this experiences. The symbols are not random. They're designed and defined by the community. The wolf might represent resilience, a bird might symbolize freedom, but each portrait is created in collaboration with trusted community members trained in the methodology. It's art, but it's also, structured, coded data. Each symbol is a data point. Each portrait is a row of data representing one person's lived experience. And together, the full gallery of portraits becomes the data set, which is a living, a visual archive of experiences. And again, just another overview of what the structured data looks like versus what the visual portraits look like and the collection process. And so then it then formalized itself outside for a more broader audience into this digital experience, Equal Victims. So what started off as a visual collection then was transformed into, in some cases, some more classic data visualizations. I'm going to burn through this last project very, very quick. So here, the blind spot. So this was a project that came from our 2019 Nairobi sprint. And this wonderful team had put it together. Again, we have a journalist from Ethiopia, our CSOs from Ethiopia. We have a developer from Tanzania. We have a designer from Egypt, team leader from Italy, a developer from Germany, and we have a UK data journalist. So together came to the workshop with some data, and effectively they're working with visually impaired. Their community is visually impaired or legally blind. So they wanted to tell the story of Ethiopia's progress. And so what the team had eventually came up with, so I'm just going to fast forward to this, that they want to tell a story of digital exclusion in Ethiopia to raise awareness about Together and their cause, reaching existing new donors to improve technologies and accessibility. The data that they came with was a survey. During the research, the flute came out as one of the national instruments, so the team naturally started to sonify and create flute music that would then be encoded to the data, and they created the experience that is now known as Hear the Blind Spot. So it's in Amharic and it's in English. I'll share links on the Slack channel. But again, for obvious reasons, the data was transformed into sound, and then it was actually transformed into a narrative, which was then transformed into Braille, which was then read aloud by one of the community members. The music was then transcribed into flute sheet music, so that they were, played in harmony side by side. And then for people who were attending performances, whether it be in a classroom or out in public, for those persons who were sighted, masks were given to them to kind of build some sort of equal experience. And so that's not going to play. Okay, so I'll leave you with this. Again, I hope that it was clear that data is anything and data is everywhere. We just need to know where to look for it. If we can collect it, we can measure it, and we can learn from it. We can call it data. And with data, we can start to change the world. Thank you. Sorry about that, man.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you,